What if most acts of mass violence aren't random at all? In this episode, Robert Mahoney explains why the warning signs are often there long before tragedy strikes, and why prevention has far more to do with identity, purpose, community, and human connection than security cameras and metal detectors. Welcome to How to Be a Person, a podcast about life, with me, your host, Giuliano. Rob, thanks so much for joining me today, man. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you on the show. When you reached out, I was really interested to hear more. So for for myself and for anyone listening, can you tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do, and we'll go from there.
Sure. My name is Rob Mahoney. I'm the founder and CEO of TVTP Solutions. TVTP is an acronym for Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention. And so what we do is we go into communities, whether it be the education sector or law enforcement sector or mental health or all three, and work with those different sectors and the municipalities on trying to create a better coordinated sort of preventative game plan towards preventing these targeted attacks. Basically, giving people education on how individuals go down the pathway of violence, what sort of triggers and things like that, what they're supposed to be looking for, and then what kind of things we can do within those environments and coordinating amongst those sectors so that we can get to those people earlier on. And basically what we've kind of found is that most people have a definition of prevention, which is a little bit different than what we look at.
Okay.
Things such as, bulletproof glass, metal detectors, more cops, cameras,
Like
and things
end
like
of the
that.
line prevention.
Right. Like they have a preventative aspect to them,
Yeah.
but we look at those more as protection measures, right?
Yeah.
Where you
It's not
are
preventing the act, it's just protecting you in the event that it happens.
exactly.
Okay,
So we have to
interesting.
do that sort of mind shift kind of up front.
Mm.
To get people to understand what we mean by prevention so that they can
Yeah.
look at it from a more proactive approach.
Yeah.
Because, the protection and sort of the response measures are more defensive, where you're sort of waiting and hoping that something won't penetrate through.
Yeah.
And that's basically the whole concept around why I started TVTP Solutions was because I recognized that there was a disconnect in messaging sort of after attacks were happening, that there was this idea that you would hear after an attack, like a horrible random act of violence.
Yeah.
And but then like 5 minutes later, they're sitting there talking about all these different signs that they had seen from this individual, or all the connected points of, behavioral problems at school or run-ins with police and things like that. And I just couldn't sort of square that circle, right? Like it can't be random. And here you have this person that
Yeah.
And
It's so true. It's sometimes it's like we have these terms that are like, they're just said because that's the only thing, right? You go, wow, I can't come up with an explanation for this. Right. Like most people will be like, that's insane. Like it's just crazy. So it just feels like it's just a random, like you said, random act of violence. And that's a term that's just out there now, right? Like it was said however many years ago. And now when something like that happens, that's what you say. But sometimes we don't realize that the things that we're saying lock us into a definition from the get-go.
Right. And if it's random, you can sort of see how the general public will be like, yeah, we'll put as many layers of protection, right, between me and that person, because it's random. You're telling me you don't know this person. And then as you learn more about that individual, you learn that there's usually months, years, decades of people who were sort of sounding the alarm. But, the sectors sort of are designed on sort of a threshold methodology, right? Like you have to pass a certain threshold for them to sort of act. And so really delving into even the design of those sectors. So if you go to like law enforcement, you call law enforcement that you're concerned about a neighbor or an uncle or somebody that you know. If they're not doing anything illegal, there's really not a whole lot that law enforcement can do, right?
So
they can put you on a list, or they can say that they're going to watch you for a little bit, but you can't allocate resources to that forever. So at a certain point, like you redirect those resources.
Yeah.
If you go to mental health, they'll say, well, are they a threat to themselves or others? And if you say, well, not yet, they're going to say, well, get to the back of the line, right? Because I've got a stack of people that actually are, and I've only got a limited amount of clinicians.
Wow.
And then with, with education in schools and things like that, they see these individuals in a certain very isolated sort of context, where they sort of between the hours of 7 and 3 or 9 and 4 or whatever it is. And they are very reluctant to sort of go outside for help, right? They try to keep it all in house, because when you go outside for extra help, there's a lot of legal ramifications, and you have to get parents involved, and you have to get a lot of paperwork done and stuff like that. So they are reluctant to really sort of stick their neck out on a hunch.
Yeah.
And because if they are slightly wrong, they'll get slapped. And so, and they're also not security experts either. They're educators.
Yeah.
So they are going to reserve their judgment to the security professionals, who are mostly protection or response oriented sort of individuals or groups or corporations to do their safety stuff. And so there's this sort of give and take, and just sort of changing the context about how you are, what it means to be like truly proactive and preventative. What you're looking for, and how do you create that sort of environment, that sort of culture of care, where you're able to sort of catch these seemingly innocuous one-off incidences that in isolation are not violence related, but in combination over a certain amount of time create the sort of pressure on that individual that then brings them to sort of express themselves down the pathway of violence.
Yeah. I'm really interested to talk about this because, well, there's a couple things. First of all, I think that what you're describing here about getting to like the core of the issue and like start getting to the beginning of it instead of waiting till it gets to the end, I feel like is a pattern I'm seeing across so many different things, like even when it comes to health. Right. Like for so long, people are focused on like the symptoms, the end result. And now it feels like we're pushing backward. Right. And we're going, wait. How do we prevent ourselves from even getting into this situation in the first place where we need to treat these symptoms? Right. And so I love that. Like to me, like that makes so much sense. And I feel like that it makes sense to anyone that hears it. Right. But for some reason, we've just, I think, part of me feels like, it has to do with, of course, the way that society is structured. And also, I think to a certain extent, and I'm not anti-capitalist, but I do think that capitalism has something to do with it, because part of what we're rewarded for is coming up with solutions to problems and not necessarily how to prevent the problems. What's cool is that for what you're doing, obviously you are incentivized to prevent the problem. And it's obvious that the problem will happen if you're not there. But do you understand what I'm saying? How it seems like, okay,
absolutely.
The way that society is structured, that's kind of our incentive.
I also think it's a misunderstanding of how behaviors even sort of get done, right? And I think a lot of people will believe that sort of an opinion will influence a behavior, and then our feelings sort of come out of that behavior. It's actually completely reversed. Like feelings create behaviors that create opinions, and then so we are post rationalizing our feelings to sort of explain certain behaviors. And when you talk about sort of behavioral threat assessments and sort of what you're looking for and stuff like that, that is a key node of understanding that you need to know, that a lot of these individuals are not going down this route because of their opinions on something. They're going down this route because of their feelings towards things, and breaking it down even further, in how, like you would ask the question, like, how does a person even get to the point where they're heading down that pathway of violence, that they're seeing that they're thinking of doing something so heinous to other people that that's an option. And it really goes to a core sense of three things that we're all sort of looking for.
Okay.
I've used a metaphor of like filling different buckets. And I think that there's three buckets that we're always looking to sort of fill. And that's a bucket of identity, a bucket of purpose, and a bucket of community. And we are always on the lookout for that because our brain finds it completely unacceptable to not know who we are, or what our purpose is in life. And so when those things during life that happen that shake those sort of three pillar foundation things, we have to go find something. And so what I tell people is that, you are focusing so much on what they have connected to, whether it's political or whether it's religious or whether it's, a combination of a bunch of different things and things like that. And you're saying, okay, we need to combat against the what. No, what you are missing is the why, right? The why is they may not necessarily agree with everything that is going on in that thing that they've attached to, but what that thing that they've attached to is giving them is a sense of identity, is a sense of purpose, and a sense of community, right? And so that becomes more of an emotional and psychological kind of addiction that happens. And when you know that you're sort of on the wrong pathway, you begin to sort of have these spikes of behavior to sort of try to tell people that you're in need of help. Interesting. We have seen cases of people who have committed acts of violence who in their diaries or in their manifestos or in things like that are expressing regret. Like they are saying, like, I know this is going to be painful for my family. I know this is going to be painful for other families. And that does, from a logical linear standpoint, we can't really figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Like, why, if you knew you were going to be doing this, why not just jump off the train, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why they don't jump off the train is because there's no landing pad for them. They have not been given sort of a landing pad of seeing a new identity if they attach themselves to this, or a new purpose or a new community that's there for them, right? And so because the intervention on these things, and I don't like using that word, it's more of a mitigation or sort of a negotiation of things where you are presenting a landing pad for them. And you can actually see, once they sort of see that there is a place for them to be, that there are people that will care about them and listen to them and take them seriously, they will jump off that train immediately. If you come at them with sort of the traditional sort of drug sort of addiction, substance abuse addiction type thing, which is more of like a top-down sort of intervention, right? So it's
like morally, this is wrong. You shouldn't be thinking this.
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting.
That works if you have somebody who's sort of physically addicted, who can't be in control, right?
Sure.
And needs somebody to basically take them and sort of drag them to a better lifestyle. When you do that with somebody who has attached their identity, their purpose, and community to something, that doesn't become an intervention, that becomes a personal attack.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is you find people will dig in their heels even harder.
Oh,
because you're not giving them, hey, come with me. Look at all, this is such a better way. I care about you. There's a huge community here. We do a lot of great things, and you'll find it fun, and you'll find an identity here. And we are accepting of who you are. We're like, no, what you're doing is bad. And it's like, well, these people don't think I'm doing bad, so I'm going to stick with them, right?
Yeah.
And the other part of this is that when we see those behavioral spikes, an outburst, or an isolation, like a pulling away from society or friends and family and things like that, we don't look at them as calls for help. Right. So if I scream at you and give you an outburst, and I'm talking about political stuff or things that you think are sort of conspiratorial or whatever it is, you are not listening to that and saying, oh, this individual needs help. You are saying, this person is going to bring sort of like bad juju into my life, and I need to push that person to to the outskirts,
Yeah,
right?
this is toxic behavior. They don't.
Yeah,
I don't need
I
that.
don't need to deal with
Mm,
this, and I don't want this in my life. That's
interesting.
different than if you saw somebody that was having sort of addiction problems or something like that. You have a tremendous amount of empathy for those people to try and get them help and get them on the straight and narrow. We don't have that same translation of empathy for
Yeah.
those types of individuals. So what
Yeah.
ends up happening sort of in the same way that, as a child, if you liked a girl, you would call her a mean name and then run away. Like, like you just don't
Yeah.
know how to express yourself.
I see.
What it says in the brain is that, okay, I said this and I went to this level and I didn't get the reaction that I wanted. So the subconscious is going to take over and say, okay, well, if that didn't cause the reaction, then you got to go up another level. And then you got to go up another level.
Interesting.
And so you see this oftentimes with people with suicidal ideation, right? And where they will be giving you sort of breadcrumbs of, I'm thinking about doing this, and sort of testing the waters to see if somebody is going to come. You stand up on a bridge and wait. You give yourself, 10 minutes to see if anybody's going to try and come and take you off of it and stuff like that. It's very, very similar to people who have going down the pathway of violence. In fact,
Interesting.
the vast majority of people who head down the pathway of violence also have some type of suicidal ideation. And, their behavioral spikes are misinterpreted. One, because sometimes they're disjointed in that, this goes to more of the coordination issue of, I might be doing outbursts in school, but I have an after school program where people think I'm an absolute dream.
Interesting.
Right. And so the school isn't talking to the Department of Rec.
Yeah.
Or I might have a really terrible home life that police are coming to my house every week and stuff like that because there's family stuff. But at school, I'm a straight shooter and there's no problems. Right. And so
interesting.
Growing up sort of in a post 9/11, see something, say something sort of society where like that's just permeating. That's just everyday life right now, right? Like that's just become integrated into the way we sort of go about our way. And what you learn by doing this sort of prevention work is that it's not necessarily a reporting issue. It's not, you'll hear this also, like if we just had more people reporting these things, we would have a better idea. No, people are reporting them. That's why they're not random. That's why you have long histories of behavioral problems with these individuals in multi-different sectors and things like that. What it is a coordination problem. And that, certain people are looking at this individual in one context and not being able to get information to get them the full picture.
Yeah.
And so when things like, the breakup of a girlfriend or being cut from the senior soccer team or the death of a grandfather, in isolation, these things aren't necessarily like related to violence.
Yeah.
Or related to anything that you would think in the greater context is going to send somebody down into a hole, right? Or a pathway of violence. But in combination, and that's sort of what you see when you go through these people's history of these perpetrators who have done this, is that, okay, they had one incident in kindergarten, they had another incident in 4th grade, they had a big incident in, 7th grade, then they moved, then they did, right? And so all these
things happened in different areas. One was
all
with their
these things
personal
in
life.
Isolation, who cares? But when you look at it from its totality, you're like, oh, this individual really is looking for help. Like a lot of these behavioral outbursts. And this is why I kind of go with this motto of like, there's no such thing as a random act of violence, right? Like it just doesn't exist. Whether it's a road rage incident, whether you're screaming at a barista at Starbucks, whether you're thinking of shooting up a school, like it's all the same. It is a deluge of a lot of different sort of death by 1,000 paper cuts. And your reaction emotionally is to just outburst because you need help, right? You don't either know how much it's affecting you, and then all of a sudden there's this explosion, or you're not getting the help that you need. And so you need to find a way to get people's attention.
If you're enjoying the show and want to support, go to howtobeaperson.co and click support the show. The more support the show gets, the more episodes can be produced. Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I think, so one of the things that I talk about a lot is how I believe that people are good. And that's hard to wrap your mind around when you see people do terrible things. I think this topic especially is a good example of that. I think that we tend to put people into camps of like, these are good people and these are bad people. And especially in a scenario like this, like you said, the empathy isn't there. And of course, that is not a small ask, right? When you're like, this person shot up a school and killed children. Oh my God, right? Like you would think that person doesn't deserve any empathy. When in reality, it's like if that person had empathy over here, they probably would have stayed in that camp of what you would describe as a good person and not moved into this camp over here, where they ended up doing that thing. And it's not that it's anyone's fault necessarily, but the point is that this is the reason why I like what you're describing, because for me, I hold that belief that people are good, but I'm also trying to make sense of that, right? Because I see certain things happening. And to me, it goes, I see. Each human, right? All human beings have this, like what you said, this desire for purpose, this desire for community, having a strong identity. And when those things are shaken or taken from you, or you go through something where those things are, shattered and brought into question, it can lead you down this path to, like you said, where you latch on to certain ideas or certain things that lead you down a bad path. So it's super, super interesting. What I'm curious about is like, because I don't think we've talked about this yet, is like, how did you get into this in the first place? Like, what was your background before this?
Yeah, so I started in emergency management. So back in like 2005, we had Hurricane Katrina, and I was watching that along with everybody else. And there were things about that response that I felt were so logical that I couldn't believe that somebody, that either the city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, the federal government didn't think of that. And one of the things that really became like a trigger for me, and I'm not like I'm a huge pet person now, but I wasn't back then. But the one thing that sort of got me under my skin the most was they weren't evacuating people out of New Orleans because they had pets, because they hadn't made accommodations at that moment, at that time, for pet evacuations. And if you ever had a pet, like, you're not leaving your pet. Like, I don't like, you're just not. My wife would rescue the pets before that she even came to rescue me. So it's, that was one of those things, like, just, I couldn't believe that hadn't been brought up. Right. And so I went and got a master's degree in emergency management, and sort of started working with local counties and then states on different plans, everything from earthquake, incendiary device, nuclear, bomb stuff, hurricanes, and the like. And throughout that sort of career, you sort of learn that a lot of emergency management is relationship building, and getting people sort of on the same page, and, trying to communicate very complex response things, or very complex preventive and mitigations things, in a very simple way. And I just kept seeing, as we've all seen, like, more and more heinous attacks, right? And I kept, as I mentioned earlier, like, I couldn't square that circle of, like, random act of violence. Yes, we've had 14 years of, behavioral problems with this individual, or yes, the police have gone to this individual's home a number of times. And I'm like, what's the disconnect here? There definitely seems to be something that's missing. And I felt like, all right, well, let me see if this coordination expertise, this emergency management expertise of bringing a lot of different sectors together for an overall goal, could do it. And then I just began to start cracking away at more of the psychology of these individuals, and the psychology of how we've designed our systems within society, right? They're systems by its general sense are very rigid. And we've also hyper specialized a lot of our care sort of systems, right? So I've worked with states that could tell you if you are a first-time recipient of food stamps. They could tell you from the month, week, and day through analytics that you were, and give you a percentage of, based upon where you live, that you would come back for housing assistance, right?
Mm.
But the system that deals with food assistance deals with food assistance. They don't deal with preventing housing problems, right? Because they've got a big plate.
Yeah, it's
And
all
then the
separate.
housing people have their housing things. So they're not going to get notified if somebody has a food problem. And even if you gave them the analytics, and this kind of goes into like a different sort of discussion about like AI and security and things like that.
Yeah.
But if you have an analytics thing that pops out a 36% probability, okay, what does that mean to me? Right? Like, what is that? Does that initiate a response? Does that have to go to a threshold? And I think the systems, by their nature, kind of create that threshold thing where, okay, you need to either do something illegal, or you need to make an actual threat, or you need to be almost at the doorstep
Yeah.
for some sort of response to happen, because the
Yeah.
systems are just not designed necessarily for prevention. They're designed for sort of response. And you work with different states where you sort of see this very clearly. One state in particular that I worked with was the state of Vermont, that did a study that more on suicide, on the people that committed suicide within their state, but ended up finding that within one calendar year, all the people that committed suicide within one calendar year in their state, 98% of them were connected to one sort of social service entity within the state, right? 78% of those people were connected to 3 or more. And so that really sort of shows how sort of isolated and hyper specialized these systems have become, where you get individuals who are connected to 3 different sort of systems and still feel the need to end their life, because they're not getting what they need. And part of
there been coordination across these systems that could potentially have been prevented.
Right. And that's part of the story around behavioral threat assessment. So when I go and I teach about behavioral threat assessments and start developing their teams and things like that, one of the things that I try to immediately take off the sort of out of the context is behavioral threat assessment. We are not talking about behavioral threat assessment, because when you, just like random act of violence, when you put that context to it, that definition, people will start looking for threats, right?
Yep. It's like I was saying before about putting people in the buckets of like this person you have empathy for, this person is a threat.
Right. And so things like the breakup of a girlfriend, or the death of a grandfather, or a retirement, or anything like that, these aren't things that are threat related.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you are looking for threatening behaviors, you're already waiting too long, right? If you notice something is odd, and I go to school sometimes and I say, all right, you tell me the difference between a quiet kid in the corner that's not causing any problems and somebody who's in the depth grips of isolation, who has no friends and nobody wants to talk to him. Like, tell me the difference, because you can't, right?
Yeah.
And so if you get that vibe that there's something maybe wrong, or there's somebody who's kind of isolated, who doesn't really want to be a part of it, maybe they are quiet, maybe they are nervous, maybe they need somebody to say, hey, it's okay, well, you know, you're part of this class, or you're part of this community, or you're part of this, you know, I care about you, and sort of being more proactive. And what's interesting about sort of going into more of the security apparatus around not just schools, but also around sort of just general security in general, is the idea of sort of what I've coined as sort of Zen security. The point of being a security professional or having a safe environment is to try and make, if I can make a haiku, is to try and make the environment, is the water as still as possible. This way you can tell what's causing the ripple. Okay. so much of these protection measures, whether it's cameras or metal detectors or more security or anything else, those are all ripples in your security. If you go, I have this story that I give of me going to a liquor store in a city. And as I'm approaching the liquor store, I see the cameras and I see, a harsh sort of giant fluorescent light. And I get to the door and it's, bulletproof glass and it's steel plated. And then I get in and there's like a little holding pen where I have to go through a metal detector. And then there's an armed security guard that wands me down. And then I go finally into the store with, a door, and I can see TVs where I'm looking at myself. There's harsh lighting, and it's floor to ceiling bulletproof glass. And I have to do everything, all commerce through a drawer. Right. And I remember thinking in that moment, like, I'm in the safest place I've ever been in my life. And I'm also the most scared that I've ever been in my life, because the narrative on a lot of these things isn't, oh, look at all these security measures, aren't I in a safe place? It's, what the hell goes on here that they felt the need to put all of this stuff here.
Yeah.
And that change, that feeling, and this is how sort of like I talk about how feelings dictate behaviors and then opinions afterwards. That feeling of being in an environment that has that amount of security and actually not feeling safe completely changes my behavior. I went in there thinking I was going to maybe buy something or maybe see something that catches my eye and everything else. And instead, I just looked for the first thing that I saw and I just got the hell out of there.
Yeah, you're like on high alert.
I'm just on high alert. And so if you're a security professional, if you're putting all these things into the environment and you're putting everybody on high alert, everybody's looking over your shoulder, it's getting harder and harder to see those little ripples of people that might need attention. Yeah. And so a lot of the behavioral threat assessment stuff is really not so much behavioral threats, like looking for threats, is looking more for abnormalities. It's more natural to us to do that. Our senses of smell, sight, that general sense of hearing, the sixth sense of when somebody comes into the room and the whole, attitude changes in the room. All of those things are more telling for our own security and our own safety than any of the protection measures sort of can do, and especially when we're talking about sort of prevention. Yeah. Because we've evolved in sort of recognizing those things, right? Yeah. And so we can't take as much bandwidth to analyze everything that's going on in the world. So what we do is we prioritize those abnormalities. Yeah, you walk into a room that smells like gas, right? Like that's abnormal. Yeah. Right. That I just saw something, a plane fly really, really low. That's abnormal, right? I'm going to recognize those different things. And so if I see somebody who's just sort of not on the same page, I have to look at that from a security standpoint, and I have to be proactive in just asking. That's not surveillance. That's not, interventing on somebody's civil rights or anything else. That's actually being a caring sort of citizen, right? Because I'm not necessarily evaluating the what. I'm evaluating sort of their own body language and seeing if they are giving me sort of feedback that is concerning to me. Yeah. And so, when we organize these teams, a lot of times we spread the responsibility out as much as possible. And so one of the things that we have found is if you have sort of choke points where you have one individual who's kind of like your all-knowing guidance counselor kind of thing, who's friends with everybody and who meets people out at the bus stop or when they come into the school or greets people at the door of your business and things like that. If that person leaves or retires, like the whole thing kind of crumbles. And so you want to kind of empower everybody across, sort of like a little bit of knowledge across a wider expanse is better than a lot of knowledge in a very narrow window.
Yeah.
And so you people are more naturally enticed by sort of that wider, thinner sense of knowing that they're okay, right?
Yeah.
And instead of going to, an SRO, a school resource officer, or something like that. And so we do that. One of the big success stories that we had was we incorporated bus drivers into a school behavioral threat assessment team. Yes, for the main reason of looking out for different behaviors that might lead to violence, right?
Yeah.
What we ended up finding was, there was a kid who got dropped off at one stop and picked up at another, and we thought that was abnormal. Come to find out that there were older kids at the place where he was being dropped off at that were bullying him. And, that was something that wasn't happening at the other stop. So instead of getting picked up or dropped off at the one stop, he would get dropped off at the other stop. And so that isn't something that is behavioral threat assessment related. That's not violence related in any way or shape or form, but it's something that needed to be addressed in a proactive approach.
Yeah, and something that, like, coupled with other events,
right,
could have led down that path later.
They ended up finding another student who was coming to the bus stop, and the back of their car looked like it was filled with like blankets and pillows and things like that. Sure enough, they had been evicted from their apartment, right? Not violence related in any sort of way, but something that needed to be addressed. And so these sort of, I have removed myself from the behavioral threat assessment team. I have relabeled them care teams.
It's funny you say that. That was the first word that came to my head, was like, because I know obviously you're looking at this from like a systems and like operational standpoint. For me, I'm looking at it from a human standpoint of like an individual within these situations. And it's just like, we just need to care more about each other.
Right. It seems,
right? It's like we view each other as
concept. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like we're viewing people as enemies or people who are on our side, right? You're either on our side or against our side, or you're someone who's a stranger to me, or you're familiar to me, or you're someone I know, or you're someone I don't know. Instead of looking at each other and like viewing it's like, hey, this is a person. This is someone who is also part of the human family, right? And if I can treat them that way, and if everyone can be treated that way, from what I'm understanding, this is what I'm asking a question at this point. If that were the case, does that mean that we would be essentially proactively preventing a lot of these things from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. And I think, going back to sort of like the hyper specialization of the systems and things like that, I get feedback all the time from people of like, okay, well, I got, awareness of substance abuse training. I got awareness of child trafficking. I got awareness of domestic abuse training. I got your training on targeted violence. I got, all this other training. And so what I did was I saw something, I thought it was odd, but I didn't know what lane it should go into. Right. And so what I did was I waited for more sort of factors or behavioral indicators to sort of like come. But unfortunately, that individual sort of either left the company before another thing popped up, or moved on to a different grade or something like that. And so I just stayed on that nugget of information, didn't really share it with anybody, didn't really do anything about it because I was too concerned with picking which lane I needed to go. And so that's why I really strip away the idea of like a behavioral threat assessment team and move to a care team, because you don't have to worry about in a care team what lane it goes into.
Yeah.
And you just do it. Like you can make it as big or as small. Like you could have a care team just for a classroom or just for a particular, office team. Right? You have a care team within a team. You could make it for the whole office, or you can make it for the whole school. You can make it for the district. You can, right? And then so this way, as a care team, you're just collecting a lot more. And I know when I start saying like, oh, you're collecting data, it sounds as if we're surveilling everybody. I push back on that in the sense that we're surveilling people in a more humanistic sort of way rather than a technological way. We don't like people, having a camera on us and having somebody watch over us, or, reading our text messages or looking at what we're looking at on social media. We don't like that type of surveillance.
Yeah.
We might not necessarily like people butting into our business either, but the fact that somebody kind of takes the proactive approach of, this just was weird. Hey, how you doing? Can I help you with anything? That doesn't usually, if I respond to that, if you say that to me and I say, go F yourself, that's an indicator to you that there's something going on.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right? Like, that's not, so I didn't need to go through all of your internet history. I didn't need to go and put cameras on you to follow you and get your license plate number and everything else. I've already established, there's something, there's this person is going through something. Yeah. Right. And so from that standpoint, I actually find that it's a little bit more sort of, civil liberties friendly to do this type of more care team early prevention work rather than the protection and response thing, which is really trying to figure out who your threats are in the immediate. Yeah. Right. And there's also a big ROI sort of thing. I get this a lot from some sort of clients who are a little bit hesitant and things like that, of like, all right, well, how much money do we have to go towards this? Right. Yeah. And I'm like, well, as you said, like, we just have to be nicer to each other, or we just have to like create a different context of how we're going to define this environment or this group or this school or whatever it is. So I don't see like a huge financial thing from it, but that's really hard to go to like a parent teacher group or something like that and say like, yeah, we're not going to go and spend X tens of thousands of dollars on these security measures. We're going to actually work on being more proactive and nice to each other. Right. Like, that doesn't necessarily fly. Right.
That's kind of crazy though, to think about. It really is like, I didn't think about it until you said it. Like, you lay it out like that and people are like, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
We need security cameras.
We need security cameras.
If you've been thinking about getting life insurance but keep putting it off, now's probably a good time to look into it. Go to howtobeaperson.co and click life insurance to get a quote now.
So then the natural question off of that is, all right, then what is your ROI on the fence, on the barbed wire, on the cops, on the bulletproof glass? What's the ROI on that? So if you spend $1 million retrofitting like this building to be as safe as possible, you're under the assumption that you are getting $1 million plus. Yeah. On all those things. So what metric are you using? Because it can't be just because something didn't happen today, therefore it is working. So this kind of just goes to the context thing, where you sort of like the value of this ideology compared to more of the protection and response ideology is a weird one, because it's a subjective human valuation. And it's one of the reasons why like The Price is Right is still on the air, is because human beings cannot figure out value for the life of them. Like,
that's such a good point.
Like, you don't know what a all expense paid trip to Cabo is compared to, a 3 TVs, like big screen TVs. Like there's no barometer there. And so we end up kind of creating this rationalized way of like, all right, well, if we need security, that obviously means that we need cameras, or we need bulletproof glass, or we need more security guards. And there's a lot of different ways in which we can manipulate behavior for safety ways that we just haven't really explored and looked at. And they're out there. Yeah. There are ways of doing it. One of the greatest examples, and actually one of the best sectors at looking at sort of behavioral safety type things, is transportation sector. So like the roads and how you make roads and things like that, they are very, very concerned about how big a sidewalk is going to be and the way an intersection is going to be. And if we're going to put a bus lane, like what do we need to do for the pedestrians and things like that. So one of the interesting things that I came across was something called a pedestrian refuge. So this is sort of like a little concrete island that they put in the middle of the road, usually with a crosswalk splitting in the middle of the island, right? Now, this island sticks out maybe 6-8 inches into either lane.
Okay.
But what it does is, from a driver's perspective, it closes down the lane just enough for your vision that you naturally let off the gas. So you will naturally slow down upon seeing one of these things. And some cities have them as sort of like these permanent like street markers or something, like these almost like cones that sort of flip out, that sort of go up and stuff like that. They don't actually put the concrete in them, but anything that will shrink the lane just a little bit will get people to do that sort of thing.
So interesting.
And the private sector has been researching sort of behavioral economics for a long time. In fact, I think there's like an Austrian school of behavioral economics that sort of published this report based on sort of restaurants and things like that, of we cannot differentiate between the man that cooks the food and the boy that sweeps the floor. Right. So basically saying, like, you could have a Michelin star restaurant, but if you put it next to a fertilizer plant, nobody's going to be able to recognize it. Or if you go into the restaurant and there's crumbs all over the floor and the napkins are dirty and there's spots on the silverware, you're going to say that that was a bad experience, even if you were getting Michelin star food. Right. Okay. So like looking at the totality of the experience from a commercial sector. Starbucks has done this. They look at wood grain, how many, the level of lumens in their lights. They reoriented their HVAC system to blow their oven sort of vents onto the seating area so that you actually smell the warm croissants, you smell the pastries, you smell those types of things.
Okay.
One of the things that they've also did was they commissioned a special coffee maker because they wanted to recreate European cafe culture, but the things that were done in Europe, the machines that were done in Europe were quiet, but they were too slow, right? And then the ones that were in the United States were too loud, but they were really, really quick. So they needed to find a way to sort of merge these two, because one of the motivating factors for Starbucks was to be a place where people just sort of hung out and did an interview like this, or did a meeting, or did emails or something like that. You needed to have a sensory that people knew that their coffee was being made, but they could still have but it was quiet enough that they could still have a conversation. Yeah. That's the level of detail that sort of like, to get you to buy a $5 cup of coffee, that they're willing to go and do research on. Yeah. I don't see that sort of level of granularity from the security side of things. So going to a school and saying, instead of putting metal detectors in front of the school, if you created sort of like a victory garden and made this like with flowers, or you put you had your staff sort of greet the kids as they come off the bus stop, almost like a doorman sort of thing of like, hey, how you doing? Right. Yeah. If you put some noise canceling stuff in the cafeteria, if you change the color of the walls from like white concrete block, sort of cinder block sort of things, to, I don't know, cornflower blue.
Stop prison walls and prison lights. And
right. And you change the fluorescent lights to maybe something that's like around 2,700 lumens or something like that. Yeah. All of those things really change all the behaviors. And that kind of goes back to sort of that Zen security of you're trying to make that water as still as possible, because you have a much more dynamic indicator of something is wrong, right? Like, what's interesting about the Starbucks example is that there's never been a mass attack, knock on wood, right, at a Starbucks ever. There has been isolated shootings, but there's never been a mass attack. Now, Starbucks is floor to ceiling glass. Most of them are, right? There's never a security guard that I've ever seen at a Starbucks.
True.
Nobody, I mean, people get pissed off about their orders and stuff like that, but not to the scale of that you would ever feel as though somebody's going to come in with an automatic weapon and start shooting it up, right? Yeah. And so it's just an interesting way of influencing different behaviors. And to go back to sort of the transportation thing, one of the really funny things that I've read is instead of flashing, to get people to slow down, sometimes you'll have these markers and they'll flash your speed, or they'll tell you to slow down or something like that. One of the more effective ways that gets people to slow down is just to project a smiley face or a frowny face as you're moving past the speed camera.
Okay.
So that, for whatever reason, right? Like, human beings aren't necessarily logical. So that creates a feeling of guilt if you're going fast and you see a frowny face. And if you see a smiley face, you're doing fine, and you just continue on your way, right? And it's bizarre, but those are the types of things. Like, you have to look at more. We got to kind of like remove our logic hat for a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And understand that we're dealing with feelings and emotion and psychology, which do not follow a linear logical path. And by instituting different methodologies that are logical from a security standpoint, and dismissing sort of that human messiness of feelings and vibes and all those types of things, you really are putting a square peg in a round hole. Like, you're never going to get to really what your main goal is, which is making that place as safe as possible or as inviting as possible. And that goes anywhere from, your local school to your office building to a restaurant to your whole town. And one of the better things that I've seen over the last couple of years has been this recognition on sort of towns that are more into the prevention side of extracting the behavioral threat assessment teams or the care teams out of the schools and bringing it up to more of a town level. Because, the schools can be a part of the care team and a component of it, but they don't need to be the coordinating force. And it is something that is sort of a weight that is a little bit too much for one school to sort of take on for a town. And you also get these really skewed data points where like 99% of all threats for a calendar year are done by 18 and under. And it's like, listen, if 99% of all of our death threats are coming from 18 and under kids, like, we got to just say they're no longer the future. They're the problem. And so you just don't get that kind of weird data point. Because you're looking at it from an isolated population pool. And so you really need to sort of expand your definition of this care team, bring more people in, bring the departments of rec, bring your sanitation departments, contact the local, postal service, UPS guys, FedEx guys, Amazon drivers, if they have the same route and stuff like that. In fact, I worked with FedEx for a little while on a project because they realized that they didn't have any reporting mechanism for suspicious activity. So if you did something to a FedEx driver, you screamed at them, or you threw something at them, or you got into a physical altercation from them, they were able to call up to their superiors and get something done about it. If you have been on a route for 5 years, have never stopped at a house before, and then all of a sudden you're stopping there every single day with 3 or 4 packages that have, danger explosive, tape all over it. That's suspicious. Like, somebody should say something like that. And that's not to say that they're doing anything wrong. They may be trying to blow up groundhogs out of their backyard. Like, but it's suspicious enough that it raised a little bit of an alarm, and piqued our interest. And somebody should just
said, I think the issue is like viewing people as threats, as opposed to like what you mentioned with this like Zen security. It's like you have a baseline level of what is considered normal, and then therefore when there is something that's out of the that it's abnormal, that you should be able to put a flag on it and have just some sort of follow-up, not be like, this person is a threat, this person is a potential threat, even if it seems like something like that. It's literally just like, hey, maybe this person needs extra care and we don't know what that even looks like right now, so we just need to make contact or look into this or something like that. Because I think that, like, to me, like when you're describing this, right, like all it is a matter of like, hey, we need to be able to recognize what is normal, what is baseline, so that we can look and say when something's outside of the normal, hey, let's put a flag on this and like follow up and just see what the deal is, just have a
And
conversation or whatever it might be.
absolutely, absolutely, and that results in sort of like lowering your threshold, right? So one of the attacks that happened a couple of years ago was up in Lewiston, Maine. Robert Card, and former military officer, had sort of a nervous breakdown, psychological breakdown, ended up shooting people at a bowling alley, and ended up killing himself. But everybody that needed to know about Robert Card knew about Robert Card, right? Like the military, when he went to his National Guard duty, like even the military was worried about his mental health. There were local cops that had been told about his mental health. His family had contacted a number of, mental health agencies trying to get him to, somebody to check up on him and stuff like that. And so all of those different sectors, all those different sort of groups of people that knew about him were operating on a certain threshold of like, all right, well, we've done what we've had to do, or this doesn't rise to the level of what we can do and stuff like that. So it kind of, the care team and the whole behavioral threat assessment and what you've sort of said kind of is trying to, like I said, it's not a reporting problem, it's a coordination problem. We need to begin to sort of lower a lot of these thresholds for a lot of these groups. A lot of it is going to be nothing, right? A lot of it is going to be, yeah, there was an older kid who was bullying one kid. It's not that big a deal, sort of thing. But in that moment, that's something that like you got to change the directory of that individual storyline just enough that it doesn't become an issue. And then they know, everybody kind of knows that, hey, like you're going to get a response even for the most minor of details. You get evicted from your apartment and you're living out of your car. That initiates a response that lowers sort of the threshold and things like that. I've picked targeted violence because it's sort of the worst end result.
Yeah.
But really what we're sort of talking about is just a different proactive approach to a lot of different societal problems.
Yeah.
And nipping them in the butt before they begin to snowball, where you have to do your far more aggressive interventions, mitigations, security measures in response, right?
Yeah. Well,
it's not to say that there isn't value in like active shooter drills. It's not to say that I'm trying to replace all, fences or metal detectors or anything else. What I'm saying is that we've become outbalanced, right? We have valued, or we have elevated the value of the protection and response things to such a degree that we've almost forgotten that there's another thing that we can do here on the prevention side.
Yeah. I think too, like, just so I'm clear, when you're saying like flagging certain things that you notice, like you said, there were a couple things where it's like, oh, this kid was getting bullied, or, they realized they were sleeping out in their car. That right now is something that's not a big deal. But are those, like, even just those small examples, are those some of the things that when paired with other events and other things happening in their life could lead down to that path?
Yeah, because again, you're looking at an incident in isolation, right? Those individuals got evicted from their apartment. Well, how does that happen, right? Like, are there other factors that contributed to that?
I see.
Right?
Yeah.
This kid is being bullied. Are there other factors? Like, what's the bully's story? What's the victim's story, right? Like, what's going on there? And so, again, it kind of dispels this idea of like all violence is random. Like, you don't just become homeless, right? You don't just end up being addicted to substances or something. Like, there's a storyline there. And oftentimes that story, that character arc is filled with all of these like death by 1,000 paper cut kind of things that in isolation, they don't really raise anybody's concern, or they may not even raise the concern of the individual themselves, right? They might not know about it. One of the reasons why we don't use risk factors as predictive is because it's an outside looking in. So you can have a bunch of different risk factors, but I'm the one that's determining, I'm the one checking the box, right? For you, if you're living in that environment, you don't look at it as risk factors. You look at it as life.
Yeah, it's just part of your
Like,
life.
it's just everybody around you has that same risk factor. So how is it abnormal? It's just abnormal to the people on the outside looking in, right? So the behaviors are far more predictive of what somebody is going through or what somebody is intending to do, rather than sort of the risk factors around them. And so we definitely have a tendency to focus a lot on the risk factors and think that our behaviors are either linked to those risk factors or that there is a logical linear line that these sort of opinions or thoughts and things like that we're expelling are part of something. In actuality, like I said, it's all driven by emotion. It's all driven by that sense of identity, that sense of purpose, that sense of community. And that's what we gravitate towards. And when those things get rocked, however minor, or, however major, we begin to sort of lose our way a little bit. And that's when we don't have that strong footing, that's when we sort of latch on to anything that's kind of coming by. And that's when people sort of get sucked in.
Yeah. Rob, this has been a really interesting conversation. I feel like I really appreciate what you're doing. It's kind of funny because when I first connected with you, I was like, oh, I'm always like, I wonder how I'm going to feel about this when I read a little bit more. And, looking at what you're doing, I think it's really awesome. I think it's cool because like I told you, I believe that people are good and I want people to, I want to see everyone thrive. And to me, thinking like, hey, there are people who end up in this position that we would label as bad and they have become murderers, right? Where you're like, that didn't have to happen. Like that person actually, if they got help when they needed it, because the people around them noticed and because there was coordination and there was care that was given, that never happened. All of these people got to continue to live their lives and this person continued to thrive. Like that's amazing to me. And I think it's proof of the fact that like we're all human, right? Right. So just like I can sit here and be like, hey, I have a wife and a child and we have a great life and I love them. Everyone can have that, right? Everyone is a human being as well and deserves that and really deserves the care that maybe they need that they're not getting. So for anybody that is listening that wants to work with you or learn from you or connect with you in any way, how can they do so?
They can just go to our website, tvtpsolutions.com, and there's a connection page right there, and they can just pop us a note. We do everything from development of plans, security plans and things like that, to just trainings about behavioral threat assessment, what to look out for, things like that. We do draw the line. We're not caseworkers. So if you have somebody that sort of you're worried about, don't call us. We're not sort of those mitigating expertise, clinical mitigating expertise. Go to the clinicians or go to the local law enforcement or something that with your concern. But you are free to use us for anything else and any sector as well. So if you're a school or even if you're a town, we work from, smallest to biggest. And we can tailor our services to anyone.
Amazing, man. Well, like I said, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, man.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who'd appreciate it. For everything I have to offer, visit howtobeaperson.co.